A crime usually has a motive. Based on this, the police investigate who might have attacked the victim and under what circumstances. In some cases, however, people's actions remain a mystery, even though they can cost innocent people their lives. Even though many people find the numerous surveillance cameras in cities unsettling, it can hardly be denied that they increase safety. While they cannot yet prevent horrific crimes from being committed, they at least help to solve them. As in today's story, Lorraine Cox was a 32-year-old woman who lived in Exeter, Great Britain. She was with a man named Day who lived in Scotland. The distance between them was great, but they had gotten used to it. Initially, they met on weekends, talked, and their feelings grew stronger. By then, the couple had been together this way for 2 years. During this time, their relationship reached a new level. Despite the distance, they were engaged. Now they wanted to build a future together and get married. Lorraine was even planning to have a child together. However, in 2020, these rosy plans were, as is well known, thwarted. The pandemic and the lockdown began. In February 2020, Lorraine moved to Scotland to be with her beloved. He held a temporary visa and spent a lot of time there. In the summer of the same year, the quarantine regulations were relaxed, so Lorraine wanted to return to Exeter for a month or two. The couple did not break up. She simply missed her family and friends, wanted to visit them, and then return to continue building their relationship. The restrictions in Great Britain were still quite strict, but they were slowly being relaxed. Public events were allowed to take place again, and many previously closed facilities reopened. Mask mandates were still in effect, and there was a curfew. As soon as the first relaxations began, people flocked to the streets. They simply longed for contact. Lorraine was no exception. On September 1st, 2020, 32-year-old Lorraine came to her father in Exeter. She planned to meet up with her friends and spend the evening with them in several bars. They drank and didn't notice how time passed. Everyone said goodbye amicably. On September 2nd, Lorraine published a rather strange post on her social media page, insisting that she wanted to leave the country. This came as a complete surprise, as she had no further plans to move other than relocating to Scotland. Furthermore, she had just arrived at her father's house and wanted to stay here for at least a month. Such a sudden change in her mood and plans seemed atypical for her. In this post, she stated that she wanted to move about 50 kilometers away from her father to a place called Plymouth. This was supposed to be the first stop of her planned journey. All of this seemed very strange, as Lorraine was not prone to impulsive decisions and actions, especially not on this scale. She had an orderly life, a love in Scotland. She had never spoken to anyone about moving elsewhere. Now she planned to move towards France. Naturally, this post affected her partner the most. They had a wonderful relationship. No one was planning to run away. Therefore, this sudden change greatly alarmed him. Lorraine was inundated with questions. At first, the young woman answered everyone willingly, but the longer the communication lasted, the greater the suspicion grew. Everyone who knew Lorraine well could not recognize her writing style. She started using atypical emojis and words and made strange mistakes. What worried her relatives the most was that these messages conveyed a certain malice. It seemed as if she wanted to accuse them of something. However, Laura had no arguments with anyone and maintained a cordial relationship with everyone. There was no single reason for aggression, let alone such radical changes in life. Lorraine's father, Tony, with whom she was staying at the time, even spoke to a family friend and showed him old and new messages from his daughter. He pointed out obvious discrepancies and contradictions in the style and text that had occurred. Even someone who didn't know her well noticed suspicious moments. Her boyfriend wrote the most during this time, trying to understand what was going on and why she was distancing herself from him. At first, Lorraine only replied briefly and coldly, without giving detailed answers, but then became increasingly sharp. Communication ended when she sent a middle finger emoji. This reinforced the conviction that a different person was on the other end of the messenger, and not the Lorraine the boyfriend had known for 2 years. The trip had nothing to do with a breakup or disagreements. The couple had no conflicts. They valued each other. Therefore, these responses seemed too strange. Unfortunately, due to the distance, the young man was completely powerless. He could do practically nothing. It was a different situation with Lorraine's father. Tony immediately decided to get to the bottom of the matter, but he was traveling and therefore could not simply go into his daughter's room to look for clues. He began speaking with friends, especially the group Lorraine had met with the day before her spontaneous move to Plymouth. The man was scheduled to return a day later. As soon as he was home, the first thing he did was go into his daughter's room. There, his suspicions were confirmed. By this time, he had already spoken to her immediate circle and friends. It turned out that no one had seen Lorraine since they said goodbye at the bar, and everyone went home. When Tony entered his daughter's room, everything looked as if she had not returned after meeting her friends. The items she had brought from Scotland were in their place. Nothing at all was missing from Lorraine's room. It looked as if his daughter had spontaneously left on a big trip without any hassles. That was simply impossible. The most disturbing thing was the bag of medication left behind. Lorraine had diabetes. She always carried an emergency bag with her, no matter where she went, to check her blood sugar levels. This had become part of her daily life, without which she could die. The young woman never left the house without these medications, not even for 5 minutes, not even to go shopping. For short trips, such as to a bar with friends, she took a smaller bag so as not to have to carry all the equipment around. The fact that this was still untouched in her room was very worrying given her big plans. Tony ascertained that his daughter had not returned from the bar. The father suspected that something disturbing might have happened in connection with his daughter's health. Then all these messages she had exchanged with friends and relatives were much too inappropriate. Tony wrote to his daughter again on social media, saying he was worried about her health and wanted to know if she was okay. The man emphasized that he would have to contact the police if she did not contact him personally. The message was read, but no reply came. After that, the suspicious activity simply stopped. Tony and Lorraine's friends could no longer bear it and started searching. They first searched the area around the bar where the group had celebrated on the night of September 2nd, looking for traces of the missing woman. They interviewed witnesses, put up flyers, and walked the approximate route the missing woman should have taken home several times. Since she never arrived there, it was obvious that something disturbing must have happened along the way. Law enforcement agencies and journalists were immediately involved. They didn't really believe that Lorraine could have been the victim of a health problem. It was clear to the investigators that if something had really happened to her, she would not have been able to send alarming messages to everyone she knew. Furthermore, several days had already passed. The missing person would certainly have been found in one of the city's hospitals. Checking all the people who had been admitted there remained inconclusive. The situation appeared much darker, and it looked more as if the young woman had gotten into trouble because of another person. The journalists eagerly spread information and rumors that something terrible had happened to Lorraine. Information emerged that a rapist had been active in this area back in May 2018, 2 years before Lorraine's disappearance. A 1-year-old man named Robert Proud had attacked a woman who looked similar to Lorraine. He raped her but did not kill her, and then went into hiding for a long time. The perpetrator's modus operandi suggested that he was experienced in such matters, so there could have been many more victims. He had already served his sentence, but now it was assumed that Lorraine could be among his victims. At the time of Lorraine's disappearance, Robert was free and living in his house, not far from the route the missing woman was taking home. Everything fit together. The man was arrested, and an attempt was made to get a confession out of him. Robert Proud was pressured during interrogation. It was assumed that the man had kidnapped, raped, and tortured her. She might even have died, and he had tried to dispose of the body. It was suspected that he had taken her cell phone to communicate personally with her friends and family members, to buy time and confuse everyone. There was another theory. It was assumed that Robert had attacked her, but Lorraine had not been killed and was only hiding so as not to become his victim again. She might be afraid that the rapist would harm her again. In any case, the investigators' priority was to find the victim. She was clearly in danger. Robert could be holding her hostage. The whole situation could get out of hand and seemed quite dangerous. To confirm at least one of these theories, they began checking the surveillance camera recordings along the route Lorraine must have taken that fateful evening. Even after reducing the number of video recordings by considering the time intervals, there were still about 11,000 hours of footage from more than 400 cameras installed on 120 different facades. Reviewing and analyzing these recordings took a lot of time, but the result was worth it. The investigators received initial clues that should help bring the perpetrator behind bars. Finally, a woman appeared in the recordings who matched Lorraine's description. After leaving her friends at the bar, she headed toward her father's house and did not turn off the route. She almost made it to her destination, but a few streets before her father's house, her attention was drawn to something. She stopped in front of a kebab shop, which was located on the ground floor of a multi-family house. The establishment was open at night. Lorraine went inside. Apparently, she wanted to get some sustenance, as she bought something to eat and left the building to consume it on a bench. After that, she went back home. At around 2:45 a.m., she reappeared near the establishment. This time, the young woman did not enter the premises through the main entrance, but walked around the building to the side door. Most worryingly, Lorraine was accompanied by an unknown man. That seems strange, as he did not look like a casual passerby. The young man left the establishment around 2 a.m. and walked in the same direction as the customer when she was eating on the bench. According to the recordings showing them together, he managed to attract her attention, and they went somewhere. At 2:42 a.m., he returned accompanied by Lorraine. The police continued searching the recordings and found that the young man had followed the missing woman after she left the establishment. He walked up to her, and they talked quietly on the street for a while. Then Lorraine turned around and walked with him toward Kebab Imdis. All of this looked very disturbing and strange, especially that she went along voluntarily. There was no one else in sight on the street. The investigators suspected that this young man was a type of predator who had selected a victim and might be connected to her disappearance and the messages she sent to her relatives. Following these events, he followed her, keeping his distance, trying to remain inconspicuous and watching her. It looked like a rapist tracking a woman. The stranger was able to assess the situation, realizing that Lorraine was drunk because she stumbled. She had a valuable cell phone. No one was planning to accompany her that night. That is why he decided to attack. After that, the police tried to find another recording to see Lorraine leaving the building on at least one of the cameras. But they couldn't. In fact, she had never left the building. Re-examining the recorded video footage took even more time, but the investigators could only confirm that the missing woman had not left the building. From that moment on, they assumed that she was still inside the building, likely being held against their will. Unfortunately, 8 days had passed by the time the investigators received all this information. Due to the excessive amount of time, only a miracle could save the woman suffering from diabetes. Of course, her relatives had not yet given up hope. The police obtained a clear photo of the man who had accompanied and followed Lorraine that night. It was printed and distributed everywhere, including through the media, to find witnesses. Naturally, they first went to the restaurant and spoke to the owner of the kebab shop. The man told the police that his apartment was above the premises, but he had rented it to a young man who had moved in about a month ago. The young man had rented the apartment and was very withdrawn, so much so that the landlord knew nothing about his origin and was even unsure of his name. When the police officers went up to the apartment, they expected a bloody crime scene, but in fact, everything was neat and clean, even too clean. The young man who lived there showed his ID, which registered him as Christopher Meyer. There were no signs of Lorraine. He let the investigators in without any problems. They looked at everything and made sure that no one was being held against their will. Then they showed Christopher a photo of the missing woman and a surveillance camera image showing a young man who looked very similar to him accompanying Lorraine into that house. He categorically denied that the face in the photo was his and stated that he did not know any Lorraine. The police officers did not believe him, however, as the photo was clear and the faces were very similar. A brief exchange of words ensued. The young man stuck to his statement. At the end of the conversation, Christopher admitted that he had an unconventional sexual orientation and therefore would never have brought an unknown woman into his apartment. The police were interested in Christopher's cell phone. It was taken for examination, where it was determined that the missing woman's SIM card had been in it. Unfortunately, it was no longer there, but this at least confirmed that Chris had seen her before. Upon checking, the investigators determined that the suspicious post on the missing woman's social media page had been posted from this cell phone. It was obvious that Christopher had sent all these strange messages to the relatives. After the disturbing incident, whatever it may have been, Chris took the woman's phone. He did not intend to use it as a means of communication. To cover his tracks, he inserted the SIM card into his phone, thereby gaining access to the contacts and the social media account. Suspicion against Christopher intensified. He was the last person to have seen the missing woman alive. His manipulations of her accounts seemed strange. Obviously, the young man wanted to cover his tracks, perhaps also to buy time. But why? The authorities still had to find that out. Christopher Meyer was arrested. He was charged with the kidnapping of Lorraine Cox. On the same day, after the meeting with this suspicious young man, detectives came to the apartment where he lived. Experts meticulously examined everything with luminol. They found many suspicious traces, but the creepiest ones were not here, but in a nearby alley. Blood was found during the investigation of the apartment, including numerous smeared traces, confirming the suspicion that the woman was dead. Many of these traces were near the trash can, leading to the assumption that he had simply disposed of the body to eliminate the evidence. The detectives went into the alley and examined the dumpsters. At the bottom of one of them, a large plastic bag was found containing the remains of a dismembered corpse. However, not the entire body was present. Only some parts, the torso, the head, and some other fragments were missing. All of this did not allow the victim to be clearly identified. In any case, the disappearance was converted into a murder case. The work continued. The investigators found that not only Christopher, but also 5 other young people were there on the night of the murder. None of them were seen near Lorraine in the surveillance camera footage. They had probably come in to buy food or were in the building for some other reason. But their possible involvement had to be checked. They could have been at the scene of the brutal crime. either by chance or to help dispose of traces and evidence. The investigators immediately noticed a significant difference in the behavior of the entire group. All except Christopher were cooperative and willing to give the investigators all the necessary information. The suspects were thoroughly checked. All were residents who lived on neighboring streets. They had come there to buy food. There were no grounds for suspicion against them. Therefore, all 5 were released without charges. Christopher Meir was the exact opposite. He only communicated reluctantly with the investigators. He withheld most information and tried to give confusing and ambiguous answers to questions. Apparently, the young man hoped that the police did not have enough evidence against him, but he was wrong. It immediately became clear that his real name was not Christopher Meir, but Azam Mangori. He was confronted with his lie. It seemed as if this was the beginning of the end of his flimsy legend. Unfortunately, that also turned out to be an exaggeration. Azam tried to justify his name change by saying that he was born in the Kurdish region of Iraq, where people were stoned for openly having a non-traditional orientation. After coming of age, he left his conservative homeland, but continued to fear being tracked down and killed. That is why he started calling himself Christopher. Since December 2018, he had been illegally residing in Great Britain so as not to be sent back to his homeland and die there. The main suspect continued to use an ID in the name of Christopher Meir, which turned out to be a high-quality forgery. He needed it so as not to be easily discovered by immigration authorities. This explained why his landlord knew next to nothing about the young man. He kept himself carefully hidden, neither going to school nor working, and supported himself with odd jobs. But his talkativeness during the interrogation ended as abruptly as it had begun. After confessing everything, the suspect refused to talk about Lorraine Cox. However, his confession was not particularly important to the police. When the results of the DNA tests became available, they confirmed that the found remains belonged to the 32-year-old missing woman. Numerous traces were also found in the apartment where Azam lived. DNA and other evidence indicated that Lorraine had been killed and dismembered right there. Despite all his efforts, Azam did not manage to clean the apartment thoroughly enough. The police found a large handsaw and spare saw blades wrapped in plastic film. He had bought all of these tools in a shop after the crime. There, they found her driver's license, debit card, and wallet, all cut into pieces. In other nearby dumpsters, they found bloody clothing, Lorraine's cell phone, and even her SIM card, which had been thrown down the drain. Unfortunately, the remaining body parts of the young woman had not yet been found. The investigators decided to check the location data of the suspect's cell phone on the day of the murder and the following days when he disposed of the evidence. They found that just one day before the police arrived, he had driven to a location on the outskirts of the city called Tin Pit Hill. The area was searched, and Lorraine's torso and head were found. All of this had not even been carefully hidden. The investigators noticed several disturbing details. First, a piece of her clothing had been stuffed deep into her mouth. Second, a piece of skin had been cut from her back, which was never found. It was assumed that the perpetrator had kept it as a trophy, like a madman. Unfortunately, other body parts of the victim were still missing. Furthermore, the remains were badly decomposed, making it difficult to determine the cause of death. The forensic pathologist assumed that the woman had been strangled. Although there was weighty evidence of the perpetrator's guilt, he remained persistent and fabricated lies. Azam even tried to involve prohibited organizations in the incident. The trial began in the spring of 2021. A confession could not be obtained, but together with his defense team, Azam significantly changed his story. Now he claimed that he actually had a normal sexual orientation. On the night Lorraine wanted to get something to eat after visiting the bar, he saw her and went down. Then he approached her on the street and pressured her into sexual acts. The accused insisted that the woman came to the apartment voluntarily to have sex with him. The couple drank all night. Laura took some prohibited substances. When Azam tried these, he experienced a strong perceptual disturbance and lost consciousness. When he came to, he found his visitor lifeless in the bathroom. According to him, there was a puddle of urine beneath her, which led the accused to conclude that it was an overdose. Azam tried to resuscitate her, but it was no help. For some reason, he did not know the emergency number, panicked, and simply sat on the floor in the bathroom next to the lifeless body. Then hallucinations began. He saw dark entities coming out of the woman's mouth, and therefore stuffed her mouth with a piece of a t-shirt to make it stop. In fact, he stuffed the piece of fabric so deeply into her mouth that she could have suffocated on it. Despite the description of genuine panic, a video was found on his cell phone that Azam had recorded around the same time and sent to a friend. In it, he was calm, with a serious expression, blowing smoke into the camera. He attributed the appearance of this video to his attempt to calm himself down. His behavior became even stranger. Instead of finding the number for the emergency services, Azam decided to dispose of the body and began to feign flight from all relatives. Of course, this story sounded unbelievable, but he had no other defense. In the following days, according to his statement, he simply did not know what to do and kept the deceased's body in his apartment until he decided to get rid of it. When the nervous tension peaked, the accused decided to dismember the body and dispose of the parts. He ordered a taxi to transport the bag of remains and bury it in a forest on the outskirts of Exeter in Tint Hill. The prosecutor reported how obsessed Azam was with the topic of amputation. Judging by the videos he frequently watched, the forensic pathologist was impressed by the precision of the cuts. The man had obviously been dealing with this topic for a long time and was well prepared. That evening, he had been actively chatting with men and women on an escort site, looking for company for the evening, but nothing materialized. Then he decided to act when he saw Lorraine alone on the street eating. She was a suitable victim. Azam had probably planned this murder in advance to implement his secret fantasies. Despite clear evidence of his guilt, the trial against 24-year-old Azam lasted 5 weeks. Finally, the jury found him guilty of murder and attempted obstruction of justice. The young man was sentenced to life imprisonment, but retained the right to early release after 20 years in prison. This means that he can be released at the age of years after the tragic events. Lorraine's fiancé suffered the most from the loss. He admitted that a part of him died when he found out everything. Every day he lives with this pain and fights against despair. The father of the murdered woman organized a charity march in which everyone who cared about his daughter's fate took part. They silently followed the route she should have taken from the bar to her home, but which she could never complete. After that, Tony became an activist, demanding that even more video cameras be installed in Great Britain so that they could not only help find criminals, but also prevent similar brutal crimes. Furthermore, he began regularly donating to an organization that works against rape and is still active in Great Britain today. Although justice prevails, Lorraine Cox's relatives still wonder how the bloodthirsty criminal Azam managed to lure the woman into his apartment. The cameras show that she follows him without coercion. Azam himself explained that he approached her and offered her alcohol, which she liked. Lorraine went inside with him. They had sexual intercourse and smoked. However, according to the toxicology report, no traces of prohibited substances were found in her body. Furthermore, the forensic pathologist is convinced that she did not die from diabetes. Therefore, his entire story appears to be a lie. Unfortunately, we will probably never know what actually happened within the walls of his room because only Azam and the deceased know about it. Some believe that he took advantage of her kindness and simply asked her for help, and Lorraine could not refuse and fell into a trap. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves.